Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a good one for you today, so let's get right to it. Serious, what's the most real paranormal story you know? Please remember to like, share, enjoy your weekend, and subscribe. My mom moved us into a new home. She was in the living room trying to hook the cable up, and I was in her room roughly 10 feet away. She kept asking me to turn the TV on to see if it connected, but every time I turned it on, it was loud static. When I turned the TV off after another unsuccessful attempt, there was a large, solid black, human like figure standing behind me in the reflection of the TV. I was facing the only entrance and was 100% alone in that room. It was the middle of the day, but all of our curtains were closed, so it wasn't a reflection from outside. I ran like hell, and when I told my mom, she didn't believe me. My brother and I consistently had experiences over the many years we lived there. Every single night, you would hear and feel someone running back and forth down the hallway. My brother and I were across the hall from each other, but we were on the opposite side of the house from my mom, behind a closed door with our only pet, a dog. Rest in peace. Nice name. So many nights we'd both look out the doors at the same time to see if it was the other person, but nothing. We learned to live with it, as it never stopped. Another time in broad daylight, I watched my dog walk into a room we used as storage in the same hallway. I laughed and went down the hall to get him out, saying something like, "Silly boy, you can't go in there." But when I turned into the room, it was empty. I was super weirded out because I watched my entire dog walk in. When I got back down the hallway, I then see my dog through our glass door, fast asleep on our patio. There was no exit point from that room except a window that wouldn't really open, so it stayed closed and locked. I have so many other stories, but when my brother and I moved out, my mom finally agreed the house was haunted. She woke up in her room to a dark, human like figure standing over her. When she turned the lamp on, her nightstand on, and it was gone. So me and my friend were in Scouts, camping around 16 years old. The site we went to had the old army-style tent you see. Looks like a mini lodge with a short pole on each corner and two long ones in the center to give it a house look. We had a tent to ourselves after putting it up. We chose a platform away from most of the group as we were older by a couple of years. It was on a hill, and you could stand under the far edge of the foundation. It was a steep hill that you would have to climb up the hill and come in from one side. Going to sleep one night, me and him are just shooting the shit, sitting on our cots, and someone kicks the far end of my cot. But I was looking at it at the time, and I know I didn't see the canvas touch the cot, so it couldn't have been someone kicking the side of the tent into my cot. Weird. Happens again a few minutes later. Thinks it's strange. We both go to bed. I wake up soaked. It had been raining that night, and my feet are dirty, and I'm tired as F. My buddy starts telling me of a dream he had. I woke up, ran out of the tent down the hill to Sam's tent, and asked him, "Where's Darman, me, at?" He pointed toward our tent, but I ran toward the bathroom. Not a minute later, Sam comes to our tent and hands me my hat and says, "You left this at my tent last night." I didn't go to his tent. He retells the whole dream my buddy had, but saying it was me that did it, not my buddy. Even saying that I, Darman, asked, "Where's Darman?" Mind you, my buddy and I look nothing alike. He easily has 100 pounds on me, and I was blonde while he had brown hair. We believe we had some weird body swap thing. Witnessed this myself. My sister's cat was walking toward the door to go out of the living room. He suddenly stopped, arched his back, fur on end, and hissed at the empty doorway before walking around 3.5 walls of the room to go out the same doorway. In the same house, I once saw a 6-foot tall man out of the corner of my eye that I thought was my brother-in-law, when in fact he wasn't home, and it turned out I was alone. Also, same house, a small girl ghost had been seen by multiple people, but not me, and was known to play with my nephew's toys. So when I was around 8 years old, I moved into an apartment with my mom and brother. My mom and brother weren't the nicest people in the world, so I was already very sensitive to the mood of environments around me. Immediately walking into this apartment for the first time, I knew something was off. Immediately walking into this apartment for the first time, I knew something was off. I figured it was me being nervous about a new place and thought nothing of it. We lived there for 4 years, and in those 4 years I noticed a horrible rotting smell. like a decomposing animal smell. We checked out the attic, we were on the third floor, and found nothing. Had maintenance check it out, and also found absolutely nothing, and the smell continued going away and coming back randomly. Our bathroom doors would sometimes sound like someone banging on them randomly, despite no one being in the bathroom or even near the door. I also had a Nintendo 3DS at the time, and I took a picture one night randomly messing with the camera on it, and I saw the picture of a blue phantom figure staring right back into the camera at me, and I was absolutely terrified and didn't sleep well for days after that. Another time, I was watching the show 16 in my room alone, and I heard a man's laugh right next to my ear as if someone was laughing in my ear. Changed the channel and still heard it, but only louder, and I could almost feel someone's breath in my ear as they did it. And there's many other stories. However, the absolute last straw for me and my family was when we were all watching TV one night in the living room. All of our doors were shut at the time, and we heard one of the doors open, then the sound of someone running down the hallway, stopping right in the living room. After that, we got a hotel and broke our lease because it was terrifying. We did some digging after, and found out a man had apparently beat his wife to death in that apartment and then unalived himself a few days later. The apartment complex failed to mention this to us, among other shady things, but that's a different story. I'm 20 now, and a lot of it still scares me to think about. So if you purchase a home or move into a rented space and the renter or realtor failed to tell you that there was a murder or death in the home and there's some type of paranormal activity, is that grounds for breaking of the lease legally? I'm a magnet for the paranormal. I've seen a black shadow appear in my kitchen and cover the entire floor and disappear into thin air. I've had my legs pulled at night while sleeping. I've seen things move on their own. I've seen a small flying creature that I'm sure was a fairy. All of these things have happened in different places. That's why I think it's me that attracts the paranormal. I have too many stories. What really freaks me out are witches. When I was living in Mexico for a few years, my husband took me to see witches jump. That's just what they call it in Spanish. It's believed that witches can transform into some sort of ball of fire or light. We went to a canyon at night that's in a very remote area, and we saw the balls of fire jumping all across the canyon. Sometimes they would disappear and appear again somewhere else. This also happens around hills or mountains, and I've seen it happen there too. My mother does tarot reads, and she had someone come in who got a read. They get the read and said they were afraid to get this one, and my mother asks why. Turns out that this person had gone to 2 other readers and gotten the same spread each time. That's 3 times in a row, when a person got the same order of cards from a randomly shuffled deck of 72. Statistically speaking, that is obscenely improbable. When I was 13, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple of years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. My father and I slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed, the same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. My father went right to sleep. I laid awake reading a magazine. After a while, I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom door. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open, and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then, they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decided to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen, only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house, and he hadn't come back yet. Then I remembered my grandfather and father's ghost stories. Then I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a start. A feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side. It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo, even years after it went out of style. Up until she died, I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadows. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep, only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back, forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again, I had to summon up all my courage to move my hands to take my blanket off of my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night, maybe a dozen, maybe more, but it happened a lot. The next morning, I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while we slept. The sound of the bedroom door opening, the shuffling feet, the fridge door opening, nobody in the kitchen, being awakened with a paralyzing fear, the shadow, the heavy breathing, the repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things, but instead he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." So this happened before my best friend, we'll call him Jordan, died. Maybe like 2 or 3 months before, I can't exactly remember. It was almost 3 years ago. But their oldest dog had finally kicked the bucket after living more than 10 years. Well, since Jordan was wheelchair bound and his mom was devastated from it happening suddenly, I was the one who buried her in the backyard. As I'm putting the last of the dirt on top of her, I saw a white little blur to the corner of my eye. Then I see it come up to the pile and make out the figure of the pup. She sniffed at the pile, then looked right at me with a concerned look. After a couple of seconds, she was gone, and I asked Jordan's mom if she had seen what I did. To my surprise, she didn't, since she also had a couple of ghost stories she had told me in the past. This isn't my only experience seeing something others can't, but it's the one that lingers the most because of the connection to Jordan passing away. Me and 2 of my siblings were home alone upstairs, and we heard the front door open, so someone went to check outside the door. I checked the porch, but no one was there. We thought it was nothing, so we left, but once we sat back down, we heard running downstairs in the basement and a child's voice asking, "Is someone here? I'm looking for my mom." My brother ran downstairs, and still there was nobody. Here it is normal to have a haunted house, and as our ancestors believed, we shouldn't really give the spirits any attention. So we ignored it and watched a movie till our parents came home. That's always an option. I mean, what are you gonna do? Tell the ghost to stop? Just go about your life. Turn the TV up. Growing up, there were constant strange activities in my house. Electronics would turn off and on, and footsteps would be heard in empty rooms. A few times when I was home alone, I heard voices. The worst or creepiest was when I was a child and fixing dinner. I needed to get something from our upstairs hall pantry. I walked toward the stairs and froze. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. I was terrified. My dog came up to me, then looked toward the stairs and started growling and showing his teeth. He also pushed me back, so he was in front of me, snapping at whatever was on the stairs. It was only my father and I home. Mother and my brother were out, and we lived on the second floor. Our doors were locked, and no one could get in without us knowing, so whatever it was wasn't human. My father came over to see why our dog was freaking out, and when I told him, he said I was being silly, and went to the stairs. He got to the doorway and froze. He looked scared, and told me to take the dog, get my uncle from across the street, and stay outside, until he said, I did as I was told. This was almost 30 years ago. I never knew what was there, they never told me. I never felt fear like that again in that house though. I was in high school, and it was summertime, so I was up late watching TV in the basement. I decided to go to bed, so I turned the TV off, walked across the basement, flipped off the lights, and was halfway up the stairs when the TV turned back on. I didn't bother going back to turn it off, ran straight upstairs to my room. In hindsight, the power button probably got stuck on the remote when I turned the TV off, but was creepy at the time, especially when you're halfway up the stairs with a dark basement at your back. I was 19 and living at home. I woke up one night and see this huge, it was almost reaching the ceiling, black hooded thing. It was just standing there next to my wardrobe. I froze and stayed in bed, too scared to move. It was there for about 10 seconds before it got vanished. I had nightmares for weeks with that thing in it. Fast forward 15 years, my younger sister, who has had my old room for years, asks me if I had ever seen anything weird in the bedroom and tells me about the hooded thing that she just seen. I never told anyone about what I saw, especially not my sister, who was only 4 at the time. So if you saw something and someone else saw something in the same area and they described it exactly, would that cement your belief in the paranormal or another odd coincidence? More of a glitch, but still really weird. I saw a fly blink out of existence. It was about 2 weeks ago, and I was outside on my break at work. I was sitting on the curb behind the building I work in, just kind of looking around. The back end of the parking lot is wooded, and the building itself is in a smaller neighborhood outside of the city. I see a housefly in front of me and off to the side a bit, but it was upside down and hovering in place. I watched it for a few seconds, my mind trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then it blinked, and it in and out a few times before completely disappearing. My fiance and I went to the Haunted Museum last year. Ghost Adventures is a big foundation for our relationship, and we were super excited. It was honestly creepy and outright terrifying in certain areas. One area in particular is a room with the actual chair from Ed and Lorraine Warren's case of a boy getting exorcised. I believe it's the Conjuring movie called The Devil Made Me Do It or something. The tour guide played actual recordings of the exorcism over the speakers, and while it was playing, I had my first real experience. I was standing kind of sideways with my left arm behind me. The person behind me was about 10 feet away. Out of nowhere, I felt what can only be described as a ball pass into and through my left hand. I even had the natural reaction of flexing my hand to catch the ball before I realized what was happening. It felt cold, and I immediately turned around, and no one was paying any attention to me. The lady behind me was standing absolutely still and just listening to the recordings like everyone else. It was creepy, but also super awesome at the same time. When I was 5, I had an imaginary friend called Rick. He was an adult male, but I was 5, so I thought nothing of it. When I turned 10, I told my family about it, and they all stiffened at the name, so they asked details about him, and my mother's face turned white, and my grandma started crying and yelling in Russian. My family moved to Australia from Russia before I was born. Everyone started talking and ignored me when I asked what's wrong. 10 years later, I find out that the imaginary friend I had was actually my mother's rapist, and that's why he always disappeared when another person entered the room.